Okay, so welcome back to another episode of the IMG series. My name is Christine. I keep forgetting to mention my name at the beginning of these videos, but I am back with a new guest. Her name is Dr. Len Pastoral, and as you guys might already know, like the majority of the people that come on the interviews are mostly like had just matched or are in their like first year of residency, but this one will be like a unique discussion because Dr. Len already did her residency in the Philippines and is now doing residency here in the US. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But of course, before we start, Dr. Len, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is exciting. Most of the questions, like the bulk of the questions that were sent in for you, obviously had to do with what we talked about before recording this is like why you decided to like pursue the USMLEs and residency. So I can't wait for you to like tell us a bit more about that later. But first, I like to ask all our guests, like, tell us a little bit about your background and where you are now in your career.
All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Len. I was born and raised in the Philippines. I finished my undergraduate, like BS Public Health, at University out of the Philippines in 2006. I know, a long time ago. And then finished med school at the same school. Graduated 2011. Went straight to internal medicine residency at Philippine General Hospital. Original plan is to do endocrinology fellowship. More on that later. And then I got married in 2015. And then had to do the MLEs. We'll talk about that later again. And then I started the process in 2017. And so I matched in 2018. And now I'm a PGY-3 in internal medicine residency here in the US.
I mean, you've summed that up for us, but it sounds like a lot already.
Sorry, I know. There's like a lot in it.
I'm excited to kind of like dissect, like let you dissect all of that for us. So tell us, Dr. Len, I know this question came up a lot, like I just mentioned, but like why did you decide to go into the USMLEs?
So mine was everyone has like a personal story behind it, but it was more because of family. So like what I said, I finished residency in the Philippines and was planning to do fellowship already, but then my husband, who's also Filipino by heritage, but he moved to the US like a long time ago, and then when we got married we decided to be together in the Philippines. He thought that he was going to be able to adapt again to how the Philippines is, but he wasn't. To put it plainly, he was miserable. So he was miserable. And I saw that he was being miserable in the Philippines. We already had one kid at that time. And so I'm like, something has to change. And he would like every day bring it up to me, like, let's go to the US, let's go to the US. And I'm like, dude, no. Like, I was like, that involves like a lot of things. Like I already did residency, and residency in the Philippines is really hard, like the number of hours that we do. I'm like, I wasn't really willing to do it. So it took him 2 years of convincing me to finally do the USMLE. So at that time, I was in his province in the Philippines. I had my own like attending job or consultant in the Philippines.
Yeah.
So I had my own clinic. I was seeing patients in the hospital. I taught in a local medical school in Pangasinan. I got involved in a residency program in the regional hospital and at Region 1. So I did all of those things already. But again, I saw how miserable he was. So I'm like, fine, I guess we're doing this.
That's incredible. So it took 2 years of convincing. And I like how you brought up how residency in the Philippines is hard. And so another big question that I like a lot of my followers had asked is, and it's also something I'd like to know based on your experience, because so I did internship in my internship year in the Philippines, and just for clarification's sake, for those who don't know, intern year is not the same as intern year here in the US. So for the US, it's your first year of residency, and for the Philippines, it's kind of like our postgraduate training. It's what you do right after graduating medical school. So I witnessed as an intern just how brutal not just the schedule is, like you said, the number of hours are crazy in the Philippines, probably not even like allowed here in the US. And at the same time, and this came up a lot during like the previous interviews with other Filipino IMGs, the hierarchy is also a huge factor. So based on your experience, can you please tell us what you saw are the main differences between residency in the Philippines and residency here in the US?
So I love the word you use, brutal. I would agree with that. So let's start with the number of hours. So exactly what you said. So in the hospital where I did my residency at, we did not have a limit or a cap of how many hours we can work. So we call the word like call, like duty instead of calling.
Right.
So like in the Philippines, we only had like 3 days. It was like pre-duty, which is a typical like 8 to 4 or 8 to 5 thing.
Right.
And then we're going to do the next day is a duty day, which is like an 8 a.m. to even like 4 or 5 p.m. the following day. So
That
we didn't have like
shift, right?
correct. And that would go on forever.
Yes.
Like for the entire 3 years. We only had 1 week off during our first year of residency and 2 weeks off each for second year and third year residency. So there were no weekends off, nothing like that.
Right.
So you could just imagine how bad it was. But like here in the US, I believe they implemented like the 24 hours rule or tops. But in the hospital where I am at, we only do a maximum of like 16 hours. So that's such a huge, like very, very huge difference.
Yeah.
And at some rotations, you only do calls for a few times a month. Like for example, now that I'm a PGY-3, I'm on an academic month this month, and I only went on call, which means like 12 to 16 hours, only twice this month. And I had all my weekends off to like study, do research and everything. So that's such a huge difference on its own already.
Right.
So that's in terms of hours. In terms of let's say like difficulty, like we also did a lot of like not scut work, but we also did like a lot of like the difficult parts in the Philippines. Like if you remember, we also used to do like blood draws.
Right.
It gets less and less as you become a senior. Exactly with what you said in terms of seniority. Like we did a lot of blood draws when we were like interns, and then less of that when you're a first year, and much less of that as a third year. But occasionally you'd still have to do that. Like you have to do ABGs, like the stat labs. Versus here, there's so much support. Like the nurse to patient ratio is much less. And you also have like respiratory therapists, for example, who would do those ABGs. And then they would be the ones to like bring the blood work, for example, to the labs. Versus in the Philippines, we also worked as like transporting the blood and everything else. Like, so a lot of difference in the amount of work and amount of hours right from the start.
So do you think, okay, so we talked a little bit about, or at least you talked a little bit about vacation or like time off. So when I would witness my brother as a resident back in the Philippines, I just saw how difficult it was to even go on to even have or take advantage of that leave of yours. It almost seemed like you would feel guilty as a resident leaving behind all that work and sort of letting your co-residents suffer. Whereas here, like you said, there's so much support, and they really, the programs here really value not just, your physical health, but your mental health. I know there are some programs here I've read that even offer counseling for residents, because really it is not something to be taken lightly. But in the Philippines, it's just not something, it's just unheard of, that support. Do you think that training you had in the Philippines mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared you better?
I would say yes. it might not be the best preparation or like an advisable preparation to do. Like, I'm sure there are a lot of improvements that can be done or that they're doing back home, but it absolutely did. Like, everything felt so much easier that you would see that I probably complained so much less than my counterparts here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they would complain a lot for some things, for example, and you're like, oh, that's nothing. Like, back in the Philippines, you go on like back in the Philippines, you used to do this. And they're like, oh, yeah. But yeah, it mentally prepared me definitely for a lot of things, for the difficulties. Like, everything seemed so much easier this time. But just to take off on your mental health, like, I think that is one thing also that we do not put so much focus on in the Philippines, not only our own mental health, but as well as the mental health of our patients.
Right.
So some of my co-residents here know that I finished residency already in the Philippines. So they kind of assume that you know a lot already, but I found myself like dumbfounded in managing like psychiatric conditions in my primary care clinic, because that's one thing that lacked in my training in the Philippines. Like, I did not know how to manage like anxiety, depression in a primary care clinic in the Philippines. Like, I'm like, didn't get enough training for that. So yeah. And that was interesting to me. I feel like, I don't know if we were just like underdiagnosing it in the Philippines, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Or not just giving enough importance to it.
To kind of like piggyback on that, Len, I think a lot of it has to do with our culture. We're very, whether or not this is true, and I think it's true, and I think it's something to be proud of. Filipinos in general are very resilient, and although we don't really talk much about, depression, anxiety, thankfully now it's becoming more of a conversation back home. But I think it also builds character. I feel like so I was also born and raised in the Philippines, and coming here, everything just feels like it's being handed to you in a way, if that makes any sense. And to kind of veer off the medical aspect of, cultural differences, like, for example, my fiance and I, obviously, like, so he's American, and the things that bother him is something that would not bother me at all. So being stuck in traffic for 10 minutes here is already a big deal. And then I would always remind him, well, when I was an intern, I would travel 2 hours just one way and then 2 hours back. So that's nothing. But, I think it's just a matter of like what they're used to and what we're used to. Not that they would like, all this complaining doesn't really reflect much of their personality, but it's just the culture. But it's one of the reasons why I'm very proud to be Filipino. And this kind of will also be a transition to one of the questions that one of my followers asked. How does it feel culturally to be Filipina and a doctor?
Well, like for me, like I only visited like the US like a few times prior to really moving here in 2017. So I feel like there are a lot of things that I felt like I needed to learn. Like, even just basic small talk conversation, I was very, very awkward back then. Like, I didn't know how to do the small talk, which everyone seems so comfortable doing here.
It's not something I'm used to either. Trust me.
Yeah. Like I'm still working on it. Even up to now, I'm still a little awkward on it. So those are like a few things that I feel like we are going to learn along the way. We just need to keep on practicing, keep on interacting with other people, other cultures.
Yeah.
The other thing that I felt that culturally, we always say sorry for a lot of things. Like, I find myself doing that. Like, even if it wasn't my fault, like, sorry. And I was like, why did I say sorry again?
I'm the same.
And I feel like it's such a cultural thing that we do. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's something that we need to be conscious about. Like, I'm like, why am I saying sorry for something that's not my fault?
Right.
So a lot of things like that. Confidence. I feel like I'm not really that old, but in my time, like, we were still a little like more of like a shy type of person, instead of like speaking out or saying what we think, or or saying our opinion, voicing out our things. So I feel that's one thing as a Filipino. I'm still more on the shy side, but one thing that I'm working on, to be able to trust my opinion and say it to other people.
Right. And I love how we're also kind of integrating culture into this whole conversation, because it plays a big factor into also I guess like the character of a Filipino. We're all over the world. We are very, in general, very hardworking, and we like to adapt to wherever we are in the world. And just like you said, we're very self-aware. So when we catch ourselves kind of being in a different country, we try to adjust, like you said, small talk. Not something we're used to in the Philippines, right? It's almost intrusive when you start talking to a complete stranger and you start sharing your life with somebody you don't even know. But here, it's something you really need to try and practice in order to kind of survive and adapt, because we're very flexible as a culture. I feel we always try to be very polite, like you said, even just subconsciously like apologizing or even saying it out loud, because we're scared to offend anybody. And we also, like we already talked about, we want to make sure we're polite. Whoever we talk to, we're very respectful. So it's something, again, I cannot stress enough, but it's something to definitely be very proud of as a Filipino and as somebody who is working outside of the Philippines. So I'm curious, because this is a really interesting question. Sam Guerrero asked, hello, I have a question for Dr. Pastoral, but the question won't fit. And he said, having finished residency in the Philippines, what do you think were its pros and cons preparing for the USMLEs, matching, and going into the US in general?
So major pros is definitely the knowledge and the experience, because you already went through residency, so you already have like that additional knowledge, that clinical knowledge and clinical experience, definitely a plus. Major con would be the year of graduation. That's very obvious. Like any IMG who applies would know that a lot of programs filter applicants just because of the year of graduation. But like in everything, you just have to know the strength and the weakness of your application, and you should be able to work on that by defending and building on your strengths. So you also have to reach out to a lot of people and say that, hey, the reason why the year of graduation is a long time ago is not because of a gap, but because I did my residency, I did this number of researches, I became, like in my personal case, like I taught like medical students and residents in my home country, and build on that. Like make sure that you include that in like all your resume. And when you get interviewed, because you would be asked that, like in my personal like interview in my applications, they ask me like, since you're already on attending level, how would you approach like a senior resident who says that, hey, what you're doing is wrong?
Right.
So they're trying to test whether you're still someone that they can train,
Right.
or whether you're someone who would act arrogantly and like pretend or act like you know everything. And so you just have to tell them that yes, you do have a lot of knowledge and experience, but you still do respect your seniors, and that you would go discuss it with them in a professional manner for the best of the patient. So, and they would always be like in agreement with that, and they would say, oh yeah, that's a strength rather than a weakness.
Right. And so I'm curious to know, you mentioned earlier, and I've stalked your Instagram. I know you have children, 2 children, am I correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I have 2 daughters.
Yes, 2 daughters. They're beautiful, by the way.
Thank
and you look so young. It's that Asian gene. And so I'm curious to know, what was it like studying for the USMLEs? What was your approach? You had kids at that time. How did you balance it? What was your mental state like, and your strategy as a mom preparing for the USMLEs?
So this will all go back to like, the only reason I did it initially was because my husband wanted me to do it. So I am not a perfect example of how you're supposed to review for the MLE. Like way back then, my approach to the step 1, so I did step 1 first, was let me just try to review this. Let me just do the online exam. Let me just check it out. If I pass, then I pass. If I don't, then I'm just going to do my endocrinology fellowship.
Right.
So that was the mentality, which is, don't do that, obviously, because you do miss a lot of opportunities. Like I was not able to research like all the resources that were apparently available to me. So, and that's why the people who are watching your program are very lucky, because you tease it out for them. You know what I mean? You give them like all the resources that they need to be able to succeed. And that's just very, very, very important. So for me, I'm not the perfect role model on reviewing for the step one, because I was just like, okay, let's just do this. I was still working and taking care of my daughter. I only had one at that time. And then luckily I passed. It was not an awesome score. It was not an awesome score, because you only, you get the score depending on how much effort you put into it.
Right.
And I obviously did not put much effort into it. I just because I wasn't motivated enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's bad. But we have like different reasons at different stages. And so I think that you should just always put your heart and mind into what you want, and research all the resources that you have, and focus on that.
And I know you and I were chatting a couple of days ago, and you mentioned to me that you didn't even know about the NBMEs. So what was your, was it the UWorld question bank that was kind of like your main focus at the time?
I just did UWorld and first aid. Just because those were the things that are popping out when you just look on Google, what do I need to do? I didn't even know about like Basama or all these other resources. Like I didn't know. And a certain disadvantage of course is that the people in my class, like who graduated in 2011, in 2017, there were already residents. So no one was going through the process with me. So I had no one. So I had no one to ask in essence. Like, it's funny that like in submitting my paperwork, just getting the step one permit, it took so many months to get the permit. And I was wondering, like, does it really take that long? Until I asked someone, and then they said, no, you're supposed to ask them already. I called them up and they said, oh, there's one page missing in your application.
Oh, wow.
So that was how like misinformed I was. Like, I didn't even know the timeline.
Right.
Like for the CS, like I didn't even know how hard it is to get a schedule for the CS.
Right.
That by the time that I was trying to apply in 2017, there were no more schedules. No more schedules. So I had to research online on how to do this like extension on your web browser that would alert you when there's an available CS appointment. So that was how hard it was for me. And then that's one thing that I regret as well, I guess, looking back. Like if I would have really wanted this, I probably should have put much effort into it. But again, it was a different story, different me back then, I guess.
No, I totally understand, because just like you, when I started this whole USMLE journey, I started in 2018 and 2019, between those two years. And I also did not personally know anybody who was kind of on the same trajectory as I was. Mm-hmm. So everything I had to do on my own, I was still kind of like banking on the DTTS group on Facebook to kind of like look through things. But at the same time, I always got intimidated about like posting a question on there, because I didn't want people to know. I know a couple of people who are from my med school, and I didn't want them to know that I was doing the USMLE. So I was like, who am I going to talk to? I didn't know anything. I also didn't know about all these accounts on Instagram. I didn't have my Instagram account at that time yet. I only started it last year. And so I was very clueless going into everything. I didn't know how to navigate the USMLE process. So I totally empathize with everything that you had just said and experienced, because it's overwhelming. It's very daunting. And at the same time, I felt very incompetent, because I wasn't sure if what I was doing was correct. And missing deadlines is also such a huge deal. And there's just so many other factors to consider. But so I know we already talked about like the differences between residency in the Philippines and in the US based on your experience. And you talk a little bit about your USMLE preparation. How did you get US clinical experiences prior to applying to residency? Or was that even like a factor of consideration at the time?
It was a factor of consideration because as I was going through the process, I'm like, okay, I already did step one. I guess I have to, and then I passed it. So I'm like, okay, then I guess I have to continue doing everything.
Right.
And so I started like researching and reading more on it, and they did say that clinical experience is very important.
Right.
So here's when like looking for people who can help you with comes in. Like you have to reach out to a lot of people. You need to be humble enough to ask for help. Like you need to know when you need help. So what I looked into was like I reached out to the alumni association of my school, and then they have it, and they have different chapters in different states. At that time I was based off New York City, so I reached out to the alumni association. I met some alumni there, and I started asking like, hey, hi, who here has a clinic somewhere, and who I can shadow or volunteer. And you'd be surprised at the amount of people who are willing to help.
Right.
And that is, I really appreciate that about Filipinos, that we help each other. And so I found one, I shadowed him in New York City, but I'm like, I need something else. You know what I mean? So I thought about, how about I also work? And so I've looked at the options, and it's very limited. I found a job in New York City as a medical scribe, and at an emergency room. And I thought like, this would be good in my application, because I could be able to say to my interviewers like, hey, I now have experience with EMRs, because that's one thing that they're going to be scared of. Like, you're international medical graduate, like how much do you know about like EMRs, because that will be important in terms of like billing and stuff like that. And so I'm like, I'd want to do that. So I went to an emergency room as a medical scribe. Most of the people there were in their pre-meds who were trying to apply for med school.
Right.
There's another IMG there. And then a medical scribe, you basically type for the physician. So the physician will see the patients, and then I'll chart for him. But when they knew that I was a doctor in the Philippines who was applying for steps, they brought me around as well. So which is good experience. They're like seeing patients with me. And so I was observing them as well, and then chart with them. And so, yeah, it was a huge advantage. And on the side, you are also getting paid. So it's not much, but at least it's a good, clinical experience that you could tell your interviewers and support yourself as well in the process.
Exactly. So when you worked as a medical scribe, did you also ask for an LOR from the doctor that you shadowed at the time?
So my LORs, I took two LORs from the Philippines, like from my program director in the Philippines, and then the former dean of my university.
Okay.
And then the third LOR was from the alumni that I shadowed with. Okay. But I guess the importance for the medical scribe was it got me in contact with other physicians as well. Like the head of the emergency medicine was an EMIM attending, and then he contacted like the IM attendants like, hey, we have an IMG here. So it's more of like networking, and it sort of helps you.
I like how it always becomes this domino effect when you start something, and then it always ends up or turns out to be for the good. So I think it's also important to know that even though the money that you earn as a medical scribe, as we talked about, is not much, I think the most important thing at the end of the day is the experience, because EMRs are a very foreign concept to IMGs, especially Filipinos. Everything's kind of like written down on paper and things like that. So like moving on to the residency process and the match, what were some of the things you considered, or some of the things you wish you knew when you were ranking and choosing programs?
So one thing that I did was I talked with the people that I know who were in the programs. If there's a program that I was ranking and I knew some of the people in that program, there were usually Filipinos in the programs that I applied to, because that's one thing that you look into as well. Like,
Right.
does the program like accept IMGs? What are the percentage of residents that are IMGs? So it's a good thing that there were some Filipinos in the programs that I applied to. So I spoke with them like, hey, how's your like work-life integration? Like, what are the hours? What's your experience? And they were very honest with me. And again, in terms of ranking, it would be based on your personal, like on your personal situation.
Right.
Like at that time, I was married, I had one kid. So would I choose like a New York City versus where I am right now, which is Ohio? Like in terms of like cost of living, I'm like,
Yes.
it's pretty obvious.
Yes.
Like you get paid pretty much the same, for example, at both states, but your money will take you much farther,
Yeah.
like in Ohio. So I was like, definitely I'll stay with this. I ranked my current program as number one because of that. And the Filipinos in the program where I was at, or where I am right now, also say like how great the program was, like how great the faculty are, how supportive they are. And I'm like, definitely going for that. So I ranked this program number one. So yeah, a lot of it is research, basically.
So at that time, how did you reach out to, when you did find them on the program's website, like fellow Filipinos who were residents in that program, how did you reach out, since I'm assuming at that time like Instagram wasn't like that big a thing in terms of like reaching out to physicians through there?
I think one advantage that I had, this is funny, like the people who are already residents in the US were sort of my like students back home.
Oh,
like
wow.
like yeah, that's another reason to be kind to everyone.
You just never know when you're gonna meet them again, right? Or need their help.
Yeah. But so most of them knew me as the resident. Like I was like a 30 resident when they were like a clerk or an intern in the Philippines.
Oh, wow.
So I sort of so you look at again all the programs, and then you start asking like, hey, who are the ones who are in training right now? Like which hospitals are you at? And so I sent like Facebook messages to them in the hopes that they remember me. Most of them do. So and then you just basically ask for help. Like, hey, I'm applying this season. Like, I know I'm like this year, amount of years out of my graduation, but could you give me advice and tips on how to get to your program? And you'll be surprised of how much help they'll give you.
Yeah, I'm experiencing the same thing now because since starting the IMG series, there have been Filipinos I've never met before who reach out to me, and they are more than willing to kind of present themselves on the series as well to help other Filipinos. So I am just, I'm just overwhelmed with joy and happiness that it's getting to that point where we get rid of crab mentality, because I know that's very common as well in our culture, unfortunately. But in the medical community so far, the experience has been amazing. So moving on to kind of like the residency application process, or the process. I know people have different opinions about this, but from your point of view, during interviews, is it proper to bring up red flags on your application, or as a lot of IMGs have like those gap years when in fact there's really a lot happening in those years? But what do you think? Is it something that we wait for interviewers to bring up, or is it something that we willingly share with them?
I feel like, in my opinion, it's something that I would willingly share or volunteer, just to put it out in the open. Because I don't know if some of the interviewers would be like ashamed to or shy to just, they might be hesitant to bring it up. Most probably won't, but just in case that there would be some people, I feel like it's just important to put it out there. Not being defensive though, like don't act as being defensive, but you just need to know how to defend yourself, how to make your application more favorable, how to strengthen your position as an applicant. So I feel like you would need to address that. And that's in my opinion though.
Right. And I think in America, what I'm noticing is how they really appreciate seeing how you go from, let's just say, like a failure to kind of bettering, even as simple as like failing step one or getting a low score in step one, and then increasing your score significantly for step two. So, okay, you know, those things. So in like both, like based on like some of the answers that have been shared with me as well, it's like they really like to see marked improvement. So it's safer to bring it up if you've done something about it, but if not, then maybe kind of like lay low a little bit.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with that. Maybe, yes.
So I'm curious to know, and you can share whether, you know, this could be about like your experience in the Philippines or here in the US. Were there any interpersonal conflicts faced with colleagues or attendings? And if so, how did you resolve them, or how would you address them if you haven't encountered any?
Let's say there's no really bad like conflict that I had with my attendings, but I could voice an opinion on the difference between how we interact with our attendings in the Philippines and here.
Yes, please.
Like you definitely know that there's a lot of hierarchy, like in the Philippines, like even a resident who's a year above us, we call them ma'am or sir.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and we never really shake that off. Like even after residency, they're my friends, but I still would call them ma'am or sir out of respect. In the Philippines, like I was like a little scared of my attendings. Like when they're coming, I'm like, oh, they're here. I need to be like, I need to know everything. You know what I mean? If I don't know everything, I'm like, I guess I'm not smart enough. Then that's how you're thinking in the Philippines. So sometimes that hinders us from growing because we are not asking questions because we're afraid to look incompetent. Versus here in the US, there's really not much hierarchy. Like there are almost your friends, and they always make you feel and remind you of that. And that's very, very, very important. So there's this book that I read by Carol Dweck that's like growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I like to bring this up just because it's very, very important and life-changing for me. So when you think of like fixed mindset, is you think that you only have this certain amount of intelligence. And so when you're faced with difficulties or a question, for example, that your attending asks, you're just going to say, oh, I guess I'm not smart enough. That's it. Versus if you have the growth mindset, you know that your intelligence, your skills and capabilities can grow. And so when an attending asks you about something that you don't know, you don't think that, oh, I guess I'm not intelligent. You don't think about that, but what you're going to say to yourself is that that's a good question. I don't know about that. This is a good opportunity to learn. This is a good opportunity to grow. And I think that's one thing that is being given a lot of importance here in the US. And that's why people are less afraid to be judged or they don't feel that their intelligence is being questioned, you know, versus like in the Philippines, like even as a student,
oh my God,
the way the residents would grill you.
Yes. And I talked about this a little in like a separate video on my YouTube channel where I was a clerk at that time and I had a resident, I think he was a first year resident or second year resident, surgery resident. And there was a bit of a discrepancy in the blood pressure that I gave him of this patient that came in the ER who was hooked to like, had 3 IV lines, so critical patient. But so I measured the patient's, took the patient's blood pressure, and there was a very minor difference, but I see the importance of making sure you get the correct vital signs. I take full responsibility. But he decided that time to shame me in front of the entire ER and said, you know, in Tagalog, he said, the nurses are so much better than you. Why are you even going to be a doctor? You shouldn't be a doctor, out loud for everyone to hear in front of my co-clerks and my interns, patients, family of patients. And I've lost count of the number of times that's happened to me and my peers, to the point where, you know, they kind of get a kick out of like watching me cry. And so I think hearing you talk about how, you know, attendings here create kind of a better environment, a better learning environment, for health professionals to learn. And I love the quote, something that goes like, don't like educate me, don't belittle me. Something along the lines of that. I know it's not verbatim, but it just doesn't make sense to kind of belittle someone you want to train and educate. Nobody admittedly knows everything. So I know you talked a little bit about how the approach here in the US is, but what usually happens when, let's say, you find yourself not knowing something and your attending kind of like catches you? What's the interaction like? Like, how do they say you need to like study more, or you need to blah, blah, blah? Like, what's the teaching process like between attending and resident?
I think it's exactly just like that. Like when in rounds and the attending catches you not knowing, they would just like call you out in a gentle manner. Like maybe that's something that you need to read or work on, or it's not even you, like let's read it together as a team. So it becomes like a group assignment.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Just to not make you feel bad, I guess, and not to single you out. So that's something that they do. They're going to say, okay, so maybe let's just read, for example, in this case, and then let's talk about it tomorrow. So that it becomes a learning point. But now that we're talking, I'm also thinking whether the reason why we're sort of like tougher on each other in the Philippines is because just think about how much workload we have there.
Right.
Like I'm thinking like maybe that's why we're all sort of a little grumpier back there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm just like thinking maybe it's because of that. Not that we're really too hard on each other, but everything's just too hard. You know, when you're having a bad day, you have a tendency to be not too pleasant to other people as well.
Right.
Versus here, I guess, since obviously the workload is so much better. Not to mention the food. Don't get me started on it.
I love food.
No, just because this is like trailing off a little off, but like we don't get paid for food in the Philippines. Like we do have free meals at PGH,
Food stamps, right?
But here, like in the current program, I have like a $260 stipend for food.
Oh my gosh.
We have like 2 Starbucks. We have a rotating cafeteria that serves sushi on Thursdays.
Oh,
like Mediterranean. Sorry, like poke bowls on Monday. And we have like a different restaurant, and that's on top of the free food that we have in the lounge. So yeah,
the doctor's lounge that usually right.
Yeah. So sorry, I went like a little off.
No, that's important to talk about, because it goes back to what we just were discussing earlier about, you know, the huge difference between what we're used to in the Philippines and what is, you know, the current situation here in the US. And now it makes sense as to why a lot of people want to like move to the US. There's just a lot of opportunities, and people want to be taken care of while working in a hospital. It's a very stressful job, a very stressful environment. The last thing we need is somebody harping over us and making us feel bad. So yeah, it's important to bring up, because there's definitely a lot of good things that you can kind of like as a resident experience for yourself. Like you said, we're pretty simple. We like food. I know Filipinos love food. So the fact that there's like an allowance for that alone is just like, feels like you've just won the lottery. You know what I mean? In my opinion, at least. That's how I feel.
I feel the same way.
Right. And there's a question that came up and asked, is it possible, I know you can definitely answer this, is it possible to finish a residency in the Philippines, then apply for residency in the US under a different specialty?
I think yes. I personally know of some people who did that. Like, for example, we all know it's hard for an IMG to be in a surgical field here in the US. So I do know of a few people who did some surgical residency in the Philippines and then transitioned to something else here in the US, like internal medicine. And I honestly don't know like what his interviewers asked him, but he matched. So the answer is yes, it's definitely possible. And I feel like that could be a strength for him. I would imagine that he positioned it in a way that he knows procedures. And so as an internist, he would easily be able to place like central lines and stuff. So I think you could angle it that way and it could be a strength.
That's a huge advantage. Imagine having a surgeon come and like apply to work as an internal medicine resident here. I don't see the disadvantage at all in that. So I'm curious to know, what are some of the challenges, the biggest challenges you've experienced so far in residency?
So the biggest challenge would be for me. So when I did residency in the Philippines, I was single, like I was not married, I didn't have kids. So it was very, very easy to like study after hours, even if the work hours were long and hard. Now it's hard because I have two kids, obviously. So, and I am a proud breastfeeding mom of my youngest one. So that's harder because you'd have to bring your pump at work. You have to do a lot of things at the same time. So my lunchtime right now looks like pumping while charting.
Right.
So that's hard. And then making time to study, because you've probably heard of this, like mom guilt. So when you're at work, you're like, oh no, I'm not doing enough for my kids.
Yeah.
And then when you're at home with your kids, sometimes their mind wanders off, like, oh no, I should be studying right now. So that is my biggest challenge right now. And again, that's asking help from others come in. So I would ask my husband, like, hey, at this time I need to have this dedicated time of studying. And then you'll be the one taking care of them. So yeah, that has been my toughest challenge to date. It's just balancing studying and having two kids.
Yeah, I can like it. So I would bring this up with my fiance often. I'm currently studying for step 1, and it's like I try to internalize. This is something I do when my mind kind of drifts off during the day. It's like, what if I had kids during this time? It would be so hard to already like balance all of these things, juggle. And that's why talking to you now, you know, and knowing that you're a mom and had to go through all of these things, was there ever like a time where, and I know, correct me if I'm wrong, you're living away from your mom, right?
Yes.
So what was it like having to raise kids? Because I know personally my mom would like rush like to the US when if she finds out that I'm like pregnant, she'd want to take, you know how it is, like culturally our moms want to be there for us. What was it like not having that like physical, I guess, support raising your kids at that time without your mom?
Yes, it's hard. So my mom would love to be here, but because of like COVID and everything, so they're kind of like stuck in the Philippines right now. So they do FaceTime like once or twice daily with my kids. But raising a kid here in the US is different. That's why I'm kind of still feeling it, because I grew up in the Philippines. I don't know how it is to be the only Asian kid in a class. Like, I have no idea on how that is going. And that's where like social media sort of comes in. So I have met like a few moms who are sort of undergoing the same process. And that's when you ask them like, hey, what helps? What doesn't help? And I found like Filipino book clubs as well online. And it's funny because most of these Filipinos who join the book club is because they want to know more about their Filipino heritage and culture, because they were born and raised here. And I'm like, I actually have a different purpose. Like my purpose is to know, and understand how Filipinos who are born and raised here like managed growing up. And so I'm asking them like, what are the things that your moms did that you liked and didn't like? So I sort of get from their experiences, and they sort of appreciate that. They're like, oh, that's good for you. So you're trying to navigate how it is to raise kids in a foreign country, because it's different. So I ask opinion from my mom, but of course this is very different. So I also ask the help from other people.
Absolutely. I like that we're putting emphasis on like asking for help, whether it has to do with residency or, you know, studying or raising kids. You can't take responsibility for everything. It takes a village to get one thing done. So I know this is kind of like, you feel free to not answer it, but what are your plans after residency? Are you thinking about fellowship or not thinking about fellowship?
So I know that most people would tell you that do everything at your own time. Age doesn't matter, stuff like that.
Right.
But and that's true, absolutely true. But for me, I just feel like I would just want to be done with training. I mean, training is good and great. But then I also eventually learned to love the importance of primary care. So I experienced being like a general internal medicine in the Philippines, and it was different. People won't go to you. Like people initially like would have like hypertension. They're like, I'd rather go to the cardiologist.
Right.
Even if it's
right.
like a simple hypertension or simple diabetes, they're like, I'd rather go to the endocrinologist.
Exactly.
I'm like, I'm perfectly capable of managing this. I can do this. But of course, you'll encounter like just a Filipino, I guess, perception of healthcare.
Yeah.
But I eventually learned the importance of like primary care or general internal medicine, on how it is very, very important to manage your patients, to have that partnership with them so that they'll be better, they'll get general wellness. And that is why I decided to go to primary care with a combination of hospital job. This is rare to find in the US, but my current hospital gathered up a few of the residents, and we're building up our own practice. So there's currently 4 of us who's going to start on this July. We will have our own clinic, a primary care clinic, but we will also be covering each other's patients.
Oh, wow.
So, and we would also be given the opportunity to teach residents.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So it is amazing. I absolutely love my program and how they made all of this possible. So this is like a pioneer program for them as well, because you know how the US is already starting to diverge, like the primary care and hospitalist track.
Yeah.
But we're trying this out. It looks like it's going to work. Like all the plans we made.
It sounds amazing.
We're doing like monthly meetings, all of us together with the hospital administration, and everyone's excited because it's new.
Right.
We're able to do everything still, you know, partner with your patients in your primary care clinic, see them when they're sick, and teach residents at the same time, because teaching is very important, because when you're teaching, you are also learning.
Exactly. And I love how you have it sounds like you have a solid team that you're going to be working with. And that's important to kind of have, these are people that you've already been working with for a couple of years now. And so you know each other's strengths and weaknesses. Okay, you guys heard it here first, okay? Dr. Len's like pioneer program and all that good stuff. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm very excited for you. I know this is kind of like veering away from sort of like what we talked about so far, but I know you and I have chatted about this a little bit, and I asked you, I was like, please share your thoughts on that during the interview. So step 1, pass fail. Tell me your thoughts.
I was looking into that. My initial, like on top of my head, I was like, oh shoot, it's gonna be harder for IMGs, because that's usually what IMGs use to stand out, is to make their step 1 scores higher than American grads. But then again, you'd always have to think again, what is a score? Like, does it sometimes cause more harm than good to our own mental health? Because like most of us are raised like measuring our intelligence, or sometimes even your self-worth based on a particular grade, and that is bad. That is just bad, because we are definitely way more than our scores. It is a score. It tells you something, but it doesn't tell you everything about a particular person. So it could be a challenge at the start, but I feel like later on we would all move away from like score system as this, and maybe start to think about what else can you do to beef up your application. So now that step 1 would be a pass fail, step 2 CK would still give you graded scores, right?
Yes.
Would you know? So if it would still give you that, and then you should still unfortunately aim for a good step 2 CK. I would imagine, because right now that could be one thing that they would be using instead of step 1 score. So unfortunately, there is still that. So
Yeah.
you would still have to do that. But again, similar to like the growth mindset that I was telling you about, if you get a low score, or worse, if you fail, it would be tough, and of course, we would take a hit in your confidence and everything. But then you would just need to know that maybe it's not a no or a fail; it's a not yet thing.
Exactly.
It's
I
it's
like
like
that.
it's like it's like not yet, like not now. And then you'd have to think like, what should I do differently? Like, what are the things that I need to do to improve it? And then, and then take it as a challenge and grow from that. So really, like, this MLE experience is not just about your medical career, but it's also like a personal journey that would teach
Exactly.
you, that it would teach you a lot of great things in life.
Yes. And I love that mindset. It's not a no, it's a not yet. Because I think,
Yes.
again, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I feel like it's a cultural thing where we're very self-conscious about grades and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we perform well.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that when I was growing up, my mom told us that it's either we become a doctor or a lawyer, just those two. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of I don't I don't regret it because it really pushed me to work hard, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that I would want to be raised differently.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a great mindset, and I also will definitely be looking into like that book you mentioned earlier, because that's important. It's not just about becoming a physician. I think we think so much about the end goal, but we forget
Mm-hmm.
to kind of pick up what we learn throughout this entire journey. Um, and so, lastly, you've already talked about so many good things, but what advice would you have for IMGs? I'm pretty sure there are a lot of IMGs who are currently in residency in like their home country, but they want to pursue residency here in the US, or basically any advice that you have for medical students that want to kind of go down that same path as you.
Yes. So I think that first you need to know that you really like it. Same as like entering med school. Like it's something that you need to like. Like for me, like I started out not really like into it. And then eventually and then eventually, liking it. I'm like, oh, I saw like the positive in it. And then once you've decided that it's really something that you would want to do, then then you really need to put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah.
You would meet a lot of problems, like the lost paper I did in my application. I didn't get my step one. There's a different story. I didn't even get accepted to sit on my step two CK because of an ID problem
Oh wow.
on that very day. So you would encounter like I know. That's an entirely different story. But you would meet a lot of problems along the way.
Yeah.
There's so many moments that you would want to give up, like that
Yes.
day when they're like, oh, that ID of yours is not a Philippine government ID. And I was like, it is. And they're like, you can't enter the exam. And I was like, no, it is. And they're like, no, you can't enter the exam. And so I just like went down the lobby and cried.
Yeah.
But if give yourself time to cry.
Yes.
I mean,
Exactly.
allow yourself to process like that sad moment. You're entitled to feel sad.
Yes.
But don't stop at that. Like give yourself a moment to pause. I'm like, okay, this is happening. Then what next? What
Right.
can I do? And then slowly build on that. And again, ask help from people. You cannot do this alone.
Yes.
Look for people who can support you, people or even like you. Like I believe there's so many people who are watching you and you're helping, you know what I mean? Whether you know or not, you're helping them. And so look for people like Christina who's doing all these resources. and then just take it one day at a time, learn from the process. As hard as it may seem, enjoy the process, enjoy the journey, find opportunities to grow, and then have fun in learning. At the end of the day, the reason we're here is because we want to help patients.
Exactly.
So if instead of like focusing on, I want the step one score, while you're studying, like see, oh, this could be a case that I would encounter and I could make a life change because of this knowledge. So think of it that way. Everything's going to be so much better.
It's all about mindset at the end of the day. And that's so beautifully said. I can definitely, I've been receiving messages, Dr. Len, since I posted like that intro a couple, was that last week? Yeah, posted it last week
Mhm.
or earlier this week, that you were going to be on the series. And I had a couple of people message me and they're like, Dr. Len is awesome. I think these are people who know you or have like reached out to you on your Instagram. So I will definitely make sure to leave your Instagram handle in the description box. So I'm pretty sure there are people who still have like other questions that like weren't able to like ask, too shy to ask when I ask people to send questions in. But you're obviously so amazing at what you do and what you're doing. And there's so many exciting things that are about to happen this year, not too long from now. I'm so
Mhm.
excited for you, and I'm so glad you got to share your amazing journey with us today and help other people who are currently, who are in a similar situation as yours, similar
Mhm.
situation as you. Thank you again so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
I'm so happy. And if you guys, like I said, if you guys want to follow Dr. Lynn, I will leave her handle in the description box. And please continue to support the series, subscribe, like, share. I know there are other IMGs who can definitely learn from, all these experiences. And we're here to build, I guess, like a place where we can learn and help each other. Because as Dr. Len and I were just talking, you might know somebody who's kind of confused about what to do, not sure like how this process even works. So feel free to spread the word and share what you can. And yeah, I will see you guys again in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us.